Hello everyone, my name is Amanda and welcome to my channel. Today I'm going to show you how to make your own two-piece set from scratch. I want mine to be very summery and light, so I chose a white, viscose, and silk blend. But I'm sure a variety of different materials like linen or cotton would be great as well. In case you're new to my channel, I have been doing a lot of sewing and knitting this year to build up my what I call me-made wardrobe. Basically, I'm trying my very best to not buy things from new, but instead make them myself or thrift them. And I'm very aware that it's a privilege to be able to not shop fast fashion, but it's been one of the things that's kept me going during the quarantine, and I actually really enjoy it. In fact, I made a recap video of all the things that I've made this year, so if you want to check that out, I'll leave a link in the description. So let's get into the video. So starting out, I'm going to take my bust measurement and add about 10 centimeters to that, depending on how loose you want your top to be. This will be the width of your fabric. Then measure from the top of your shoulder down to where you want the bottom hem to be, and add extra room for seam allowance. If you want to avoid shoulder seams like I'm doing, you can double this measurement and cut everything out in one large piece. You can also just cut out 2 rectangles and sew them together if your fabric isn't wide enough. I'm trying to make this tutorial as simple as possible, so we're going to shape this top from just a rectangular piece of fabric. The first step is to cut the armholes. I am really just eyeballing it and will be adjusting them later, but a good rule of thumb is to always cut away less fabric than you think, as it is very hard to add fabric back onto the piece. So I'm cutting away a very little bit of fabric for each hole, folding over the top and using the cutout to make them symmetrical. Before we can try this on, we have to make a hole for the head to go through. So I'm cutting a horizontal slit right on the fold, making sure not to make it too big. Then I cut a slit down the center front where I'm going to be placing a V-neck anyway. Once I've tried on the top, I can mark with a piece of chalk, or a pencil in my case, where I want the straps to sit on my shoulders and how deep the V-neck should go. Here I'm adjusting the armholes to be a lot wider and using the cut off excess to make them symmetrical. Now, I also tried the top on backwards because I want to be able to use it both ways, so also having the V-neck in the back. I'm cutting out the neckline I marked, remembering to leave about 1 centimeter of seam allowance all the way around. I'm also cutting the V-neck out down to the place I marked. Now, you could leave it like this, but I want mine to have buttons down the front and open up like a vest. So I cut the center front open right up the middle and took a little bit more fabric off the neckline. Now that we've cut everything out, I'm starting by sewing together the side seams right sides together. Sadly, I did not add that extra 10 centimeters of width to my top, so I had to seam rip this all out again because after folding in my front seams, it would be way too tight. I hate seam ripping. So I cut 2 rectangles of fabric to go into each side seam to fix the problem, and it worked out really nice. So yeah, remember not to make it too tight. I finish all my seams in this project by top stitching down the front of both sides, stitching the seam allowance open. I think it gives a really nice finish, and also I don't own an iron. We have to fold in all the seams on the top, and because I zigzagged all the edges beforehand, it is fine to fold them in just once. Again, I don't have an iron, so I'm just using my fingers to pinch and fold about 1 centimeter of fabric in and pinning it in place. But yeah, definitely use an iron for this if you have one. Then I top stitched all around the folded seam, staying pretty close to the edge. In places where there's a lot of curve in the seam, you can cut small slits in the seam allowance to avoid the fabric stretching or curling the wrong way. I repeat the same steps for the armholes as for the neckline. The last hem we need to finish is the bottom hem, and you can adjust the length of the top by how much you fold in the hem. My top is already pretty short, so I'm just folding in about 1 centimeter and sewing it in place with a straight stitch. If you didn't cut your top open down the front, this is your final step, but I have to add some buttons and buttonholes. I absolutely hate when there is too much distance between each button, so I measured and marked 5 buttonholes. My sewing machine has a buttonhole function, so I of course use that to make them. Finally, I used a seam ripper to open them up, and yeah. Moving on to the bottoms of this matching set, I decided to make the most simple pair of shorts one can imagine. I traced a pair of jogging shorts that I already own and are quite loose on me. I was quite lazy, so I didn't even bother tracing a paper pattern first. I did extend the line from the side seams to go straight up because they're gonna have an elastic in the waist and I want to be able to pull the shorts up over my hips. Try to leave about 5 centimeters of seam allowance both at the top and at the bottom of the shorts compared to the length you want them to be. I repeat these steps for the back of the shorts and cut out my double layer of fabric, so I have 4 pattern pieces in total, 2 front and 2 back panels. The crotch piece should be a lot longer on the back panels. Now we can start sewing our panels together. Actually, before you do that, I always zigzag along the edges of all the panels. This depends on the fabric, of course, but mine is very prone to fraying. Anyway, I like to start with the center front and back seams. Pin them right sides together and sew them with a straight stitch. Then we can move on to the side seams. Like before, we are pinning them right sides together and sewing them with a straight stitch. Lastly, I'm pinning and sewing the inseam. As you can see, mine weren't quite the same length, but I just trimmed the longer one down so they matched in the end. All these seams were finished with the same method as the top, so opening the seam allowance and top stitching really close to both sides of the seam. For the waist, I chose a very wide elastic. Mine is 35 millimeters, and you're going to fold down the top edge like so to create a channel for the elastic to pass through. Make sure that it's wide enough, but also not too wide so the elastic can twist and fold. Sew that down with the top stitch, leaving a gap open to feed the elastic band through. When measuring your elastic, you want it to fit snugly around your waist without being too tight. We gotta be able to breathe. I'm using a safety pin to pull it through the channel and sewing the 2 ends of the elastic together with my machine. Now you can pull the elastic all the way through and close up the little gap. The very last step is hemming the bottom edges, and that's it. I'm super happy with how this set turned out and just in time for my trip to France. It took me less than 2 days to complete the whole thing, and I kinda like that it's not fitted but more loose and airy. If you decide to recreate this look or any of the other things I've made, please tag me so I can see what you guys come up with. It really makes my day. And if you have any questions or ideas for future videos, leave a comment down below and I'll try to answer. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.